welcome to my channel on the best of fantasy. Today I'm doing something a little bit different at the request of some of my viewers who have been asking me to talk about poetry and specifically how to get the most from it, how to enjoy poetry. It is a genre that some people feel a bit intimidated by, and it's something that I especially enjoy. I love poetry in fantasy, and I love poetry in general. And there's such a rich, diverse tradition of poems, so much to talk about. But today's video is just going to be about how to approach poems with an eye to enjoying them, getting the most from them. Because you do read poems a bit differently from the way you would read prose, from the way you would read fiction in general. There is a greater focus on the words, on the connotations of the words, and what they mean, and what they imply, and also the feelings that the words and the lines evoke. So when you're reading poetry, you're really getting out your microscope, and you're zooming in close, and you're taking your time, because reading a poem can be a lot like meditating. It's a different exercise. You're not reading to get through the story. You're reading more for the experience and being in the moment. So when you're reading a poem, you want to read it ideally out loud. And you also want to probably read it multiple times and just experience the words and what they evoke in you. And one thing that I'd like to get through more than anything else, to me, reading a poem like a puzzle to be solved for the right answer is the best way to ruin a poem. And I know a lot of my students and people I talk to have been sort of scarred by that view of poetry, that you have to find the right answer or you feel stupid. So that is something that I want to combat, this notion that it's about getting the right answer, figuring out what it means. I think it's more important to discuss what it means to you, to explore what the poem evokes in you. And that's the one thing I really want to get across more than anything else. But I'll talk about a few elements of poetry, and I think the ideal way to go about this is to read a poem and to discuss it with you and hopefully get your reactions as well. So I'm just going to pick one poem that I teach every semester, one that I really love and I find especially beautiful. I'm going to read the poem just to hear it first, and then I'm going to just sort of break it down, going line by line, talking about the various elements, the sounds and the meter and the metaphors and that sort of thing, just breaking it down bit by bit and enjoying, hopefully, the process of reading this poem in a way that is, as I said before, meditative, and hopefully you'll get something from it, and this will be an encouragement to people who maybe feel a little bit intimidated to read poetry, to give it a try. So here we go. I'm going to be reading the Lake Isle of Innisfree by William Butler Yeats. This was a poem published in 1892. And first, let's just read it and hear it and hopefully enjoy it. I will arise and go now, and go to Innisfree, and a small cabin build there, of clay and wattles made. 9 bean rows will I have there, a hive for the honey bee, and live alone in the bee-loud glade. And I shall have some peace there, for peace comes dropping slow, dropping from the vales of the morning to where the cricket sings. There midnight's all a glimmer, and noon a purple glow, and evening full of the linnet's wings. I will arise and go now, for always night and day I hear lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore. While I stand on the roadway or on the pavements gray, I hear it in the deep heart's core. All right, there are a lot of wonderful things to discuss when we're looking at this poem. There's some beautiful sounds in there, and that's probably where I would like to start, just at the structure of the poem and the sounds and what is evoked here. For me, it is a very peaceful poem, and that is no accident. And Yeats was a very skilled wordsmith who knew exactly what he was doing with his word choice and what feelings those words would evoke. So let's take a close look. First of all, one of the things that we might notice is that each of the stanzas, so we talk about stanzas when we discuss poetry, and we talk about lines. So rather than paragraphs, And sentences, we talk about stanzas and lines, and here we have 3 stanzas, each of 4 lines. And you can visually notice that the 4th line of each stanza is shorter than the first 3. And in fact, if you count out the syllables, you'll find that the first 3 lines have somewhere in the vicinity of 13, 14 syllables, whereas the 4th line in each stanza has about 8 or 9. And what I find interesting about this is that you have a kind of silence after each of the 4th lines in each stanza, because you have this expectation formed by the 13 or 14 syllables in the first 3 lines of the stanza, and then you get to that 4th line and there are only 8 or 9, and so there is a silence that follows that 4th line, and that I don't think is an accident. I think that what Yeats wants us to hear here is the silence, is the sense of peace. And that is, I think, you'll find very much in line with what he's trying to get across here in the poem. Another thing you'll notice is that there is a rhyme scheme here. You have Innisfree in the first stanza rhyming with honeybee. So the first line and the 3rd line rhyme. And the 2nd line, which ends with made, rhymes with the 4th line, glade. And that is true of each of the 3 stanzas. The first and the 3rd lines rhyme, and the 2nd and 4th rhyme. So you would describe that as an A-B rhyme scheme. And you have the same pattern repeating in the next stanzas, so it's A-B, C-D, E-F, as far as the rhyme scheme goes. And that is also lovely. That makes it a little bit more melodic, and you can also hear in terms of the meter. And this is not something, by the way, you don't have to memorize all the different types of meter, iambic and trochaic and anapestic and all that in order to appreciate the rhythm of the poems. In fact, I would argue that English, being a stress-based language, is better just to use your ear and to hear where the stresses are. But you can hear a roughly iambic pattern to a lot of these lines here in the Lake Isle of Innisfree. You have, I will arise and go now and go to Innisfree, and a small cabin build there of clay and wattles made. And you can kind of hear the seesaw there of the iambic mostly, although there are other types of meter in there as well. And live alone in the be-loud glade. So you just kind of feel for where the emphasis would be. Where would you emphasize and stress the syllable? And so that gives it a kind of musicality. There are a couple other things to note here in terms of sound. You have some beautiful assonance in here, and alliteration. Assonance being the repetition of vowel sounds, alliteration being the repetition of the initial consonant sound. So the best example of that here is in the 3rd stanza. In the 2nd line, you have, I hear lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore. And you hear the repetition of the letter L there. And I don't think that's an accident. In linguistics, L is known as a liquid sound. It's a sound that you can make on and on and on without interruption if you could hold your breath that long. And what that means is it gives that particular line a really nice flow. If he had instead had a bunch of hard K and hard C sounds, k, 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 that line wouldn't have flowed so much. That would have been a very different effect. So you want to pay attention to the effect that the sounds have, what they convey. All right, so enough about the sounds. Let's now talk about some of the words as we go through the lines. And immediately, I think in the first stanza, what you have here evoked is a sense of ruralness, of going out into the countryside, going somewhere free of the confines and the noise and the hubbub of the city. So the speaker of the poem is saying that he will arise and go now and go to Innisfree. Now, Innisfree is an island in the middle of a lake on the western coast of Ireland, the western part of Ireland. And it is, I haven't been there, but it is reportedly a very beautiful place. And the speaker is dreaming of going there. The speaker is not there, but is dreaming of going there. And what does the speaker want to do? Build a small cabin there. made of clay and wattles. Now that's that's a very rustic image, isn't it? And that's not an accident. The idea of having a small cabin with clay and wattles, wattles being sticks that you weave together, and you slap clay on those sticks and you have a wall. And the idea of being so close to nature, living with nature, with sticks and clay surrounding you, is an important one. 9 bean rows will I have there, a hive for the honeybee. So you hear again this idea of going back to nature. This is something that is central to the poem, going back to the peace and the purity and the quiet of nature. And live alone in the bee-loud glade. Now this aloneness that the speaker is putting forward here, alone can have a negative connotation, but here I believe when you take into account the sense of longing, when you take into account the sense of wanting to be away from it all, the idea of being alone, I think it is probably more in line with the idea of solitude, right? So this is a healing kind of solitude that the speaker is longing for, and being somewhere in tune with nature. So it's a very romantic poem in that sense. Back to nature, David Henry Thoreau kind of thing. And it's so peaceful there that you can hear the bees buzzing in the glade. That's how quiet it is on this particular place that the speaker is longing for. And I shall have some peace there. So the next stanza really reinforces this idea of peace and quiet. For peace comes dropping slow. And that's an interesting choice of words there, isn't it? Dropping slow. Peace doesn't drop. And perhaps this conjures images in your mind. For me, it conjures an image of dew dropping from a leaf, very as it gathers and then drops, a very peaceful kind of image. Dropping from the vales of the morning to where the cricket sings. Again, like hearing the bees, you can hear the crickets in the morning. There midnight's all a glimmer and noon a purple glow. And so we have morning, we have midnight, and we have noon here, all named in the poem. And it's as if there's some kind of eternal present in this peaceful place of nature. And evening is also named in the next line, evening full of the linnet's wings, and a linnet being a type of bird, and it is so peaceful here that you can even hear the bird's wings as it takes off. I will arise and go now. Now we're on the third stanza. I will arise and go now, for always night and day I hear lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore. So once again, this idea of night and day, he's evoking time once again for us, this eternal present, this peace, this quiet. And he can hear the lapping of the water on the shoreline. And again, there's that beautiful alliteration in that line, conveying this liquid, flowing sense here. And then, though, in the last 2 lines, we have a bit of a transition. We have the speaker revealing that he is not on this island of peace and tranquility. He is, in fact, we can tell from what he says, in an urban environment, in the city. While I stand on the roadway or on the pavement's gray, I hear it in the deep heart's core. And I love that last line. It's monosyllabic. It forces you to slow down, and then again there's that silence afterwards, that sense of peace that the speaker is longing for. But the speaker is in a city, on the roadway, on the pavement's gray, and notice the word gray there, which the connotation there is something that is dull, something that is lacks color, that is somehow dreary, in contrast to the life that the speaker feels on the island of Innisfree. So you can kind of feel what the theme of this poem is, right? It's a sense of wanting to return to nature, wanting to return to simplicity. And you could add layers of interpretation. For example, William Butler Yeats was from Ireland. And at the time that this poem was published in 1892, Ireland was still occupied by the British. So this is an important point, perhaps, when you consider the sense of longing that the speaker evokes. It could be back to nature, but it also could be the speaker, given Yeats and his personal history and what he wanted, what his vision was for Ireland. Might also be appropriate to think that the speaker is longing for a free Ireland, for an Ireland of peace and tranquility. And of course, no other people perhaps is as familiar with the displacement that comes with immigration as the Irish. And so you get that sense when the speaker is in the city, in a place that feels foreign to him, a place that feels dislocating, and where the speaker doesn't feel he belongs. And so Innisfree then could be taken as a representation of what the speaker longs for Ireland, and something that he hears in the deep heart's core. Those simple words like heart, right, and core, deep heart's core. And of course, there is that nature as well. I mean, there are some just gorgeous lines in here, something that you could read repeatedly and feel the emotion from, feel that sense of unity with nature that is conveyed so beautifully in those stanzas. For example, looking up at the midnight sky, all a glimmer, I picture the Milky Way, the bright band of stars across the middle of the night sky. And it's just an image of peace and unity with nature. So that is the overall sense that is being conveyed in the poem The Lake Isle of Innisfree by William Butler Yeats. That is certainly what I get from it. But I'd also love to hear what you hear in those lines, because as I said in the beginning, there's not just one right answer to this. A poem is a beautiful thing because it can evoke a different thing in every person who brings their own unique experience to it. So I would love to hear your reactions to the Lake Isle of Innisfree in the comments below. So please feel free to leave your thoughts, whatever the poem evokes in you. And hopefully I have encouraged some of you to give some other poems a try. There's such a wealth of poetry out there, all the way from the old epic poetry to the more modern free-form poetry of today. But everyone is an experience that is just waiting. So I hope you've enjoyed this little look at William Butler Yeats's The Lake Isle of Innisfree. Until next time.